Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like,
Yeah.
if we got, like, our plan's not gonna work. We're not gonna start until like June, like the third week of June or something.
Okay. All right.
I'm gonna be out of town for 2 weeks, so. Yeah, we're not the sharpest tools in the shed on this one.
Yeah, well, let's just say when you get busy, and life, so let me give a little window. And you'll enjoy this, Brent, because your kids are older now, but when your kids are younger, Brenda certainly will enjoy this. Everything like the most bizarre stuff happens all the time. And things in my life in the middle of the night, like the weird rando things that happen to our kids, don't happen on a weekday. They always happen on a Saturday night. So at 3:30 in the morning, Isaac burst into our room. He turns the light on and he's just sobbing. And he's like, I put my thumb on top of something and now I can't move it. And and Natalie jumped up and she was trying to do damage control to keep me asleep. And so they were down there banging around. This went on for well over an hour. And he was just sobbing and I felt bad, but not bad enough to get out of bed kind of thing. So finally, Natalie comes back to bed at 4:45, and by this time I'm just wired, and we went to bed late. So anyway, what happened was we had these bees that are about this long, and they look like caterpillars with wings, and this stupid thing stung him. And so he woke up to a beast, and of course he didn't know what happened. He just felt this horrific pain. And so Natalie found the bee and killed it, and he's here to live and tell the story. But, it's stuff like that all the time. So, Brent,
I wouldn't remember this morning. I was talking to my mom, and I was telling her what our plans were, and she's like,
that won't work.
We're not going to be there for 2 weeks. We're going out west. And I was like, oh, yeah.
All right, well, I guess that gives me a little more time where I don't have to rush through the rest of Titus, and Philippians. So that can let me dangle the carrot in front of you guys a little bit and spend a little bit of time talking about what we're going to do when we transition, which will be more towards the end of June now. But the kids have expressed interest in talking about finances and budgeting and a biblical perspective on money and how you handle money. And it's something that we don't talk about often enough. You were going to say something?
Aside, if you're doing it specifically for the kids, remember 4 of them are gone on June 29th.
Okay, camp.
All of them are at camp.
Yeah.
That's
okay.
So since you're missing the first part of June, if you want to wait until they're back, if you're doing it for that.
That's a good reminder too. Yeah, I know. Yeah. I guess we'll do it when we do it. And there's no I talked to
my kids are excited, but
I talked to both Lisa and Natalie, and they're both super flexible and cool about it. So
We're just going to have to be flexible.
Yeah.
We totally forgot about that as we were planning this.
Yeah, but it's something it's something we don't talk about enough as a culture, as a society. It's not taught in schools. They're taught how to keep a checkbook, how to balance a checkbook, and that's it.
When I told my mom what we were going to class we were going to do, she's like, finance class, what does that have to do with church? And I was like, do you know how many times
Everything.
money's mentioned in the Bible?
Yeah. Well, there was.
I said, how about Christian finances or money in the Bible or
biblical stewardship. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And this is why it's so close to my heart, because I don't know if you guys know this, but ministers don't bank in the money unless you're a celebrity pastor kind of thing. And so you have to figure out what to do, and they don't teach that at seminary. I know. I went to 4 years of undergrad. I went to 4 years of 4.5 of seminary because I messed my schedule up. Brent, no surprises there. But they didn't teach this stuff. And Christian Chronicle recently did it. They recently did an article. I think they did it last year, in the fall maybe. And they did an article where they were interviewing ministers, and they were talking about retirement. And I guess I wasn't surprised, but I was saddened at the responses and how many responses there were, that when they're doing these surveys and they're doing interviews, that I would say the majority of ministers retire with nothing. Like nada. And death is their retirement. Debt. Yeah. And right, they die with debt. And so that debt gets passed on. And that kind of hit close to me, because I'm like, it is an absolute terrible position to put your family in, and it's not a biblical position to put your family in. And it's not because of lack of great pay. It's not knowing how to steward your money and put it to work. And there was a story that caught my attention it wasn't last year, it was 2023, I think. But a guy by the name of Jeffrey Holt. He was an 82-year-old man. He died at the age of 82. And he was like this guy who everybody kind of felt bad for in town, and everybody treated him with kindness. And it was really kind of a cool thing. He lived in New Hampshire, and he took care of a mobile home park. And I'm pretty sure he was a resident in this mobile home park. And he would drive his tractor all over town. So he didn't own a car. And he would drive his tractor to work and drive his tractor to the grocery store. And so the community came together, and they were like, hey, Jeff, would it be okay if we gather money and buy you a car? And his answer was, I don't want a car. And they were kind of dumbfounded at that. And they're like, what do you mean you don't want a car? And he's like, my tractor works just fine. And it was just a lawnmower. So he continued to drive this around town. And he lived by himself. He didn't. I don't think he ever married, and he just died. From the town perspective, he was like this little lonely old man who just passed away at 82. He died with $3.8 million that he donated to the town, that town in New Hampshire. He didn't have any close relatives to give the money to, but it turns out that he never made much money at all. But he was a good steward of his money, and he loved learning about investments. And so in his free time, he would read about investing, and he would just start putting his money to work. And he died a multi-millionaire. Never did anything, as far as anybody knows, he never did anything with that money, which is a shame that he never got to enjoy it. But I think his joy came from knowing that he was giving it to a community that cared for him. And some people, they love to give. So anyway, I tell that story because it captured the other side of that I hear, like I'm in ministry groups and I hear the ministers talk about, well, I'm leaving this church because they don't pay enough or whatever it is. And I'm like, that's not the right perspective. We can make, and I know Ramsey talks about it a lot, like you can make peanuts and turn that into great wealth. So anyway, there's a biblical principle, a lot of biblical principles behind that. So that's what Brent will be talking about, and then Lisa and I will talk a little bit more about like the investing side of it. I love learning about investments. I am? Okay. Yeah, so I love learning about investments. And
we'll talk about, just through the normal course, we'll talk about the different types of investments and those things, but you specifically on dealing with
a little bit more of the nuts and bolts and how you actually, so anyway, what we wanted to combine the kids and pull the kids into this because they're asking questions, and we thought it would be a really awful good opportunity missed if we didn't give that to our kids, because especially at their age right now, time is on their side. And our prayer, our daily prayer in our home is, God, give us more, bless us with more so that we can bless more people. We don't chase after money. We don't think about it and obsess about it. We're just smart about it. We plan everything. And in that process, we want to be able to bless other people. We want to be able to be giving. We want to be able to help people. And, think about Joseph. He had the knowledge and the wisdom to say, okay, we're going to have 7 years of famine. God allowed me to see that, so we're going to build the biggest storehouses that we've ever built, and we're going to store grain until these bins are overflowing. Well, why did he do? Was he like, ha ha ha, we're going to take advantage of all these poor people and laugh all the way to the bank? No, they did that to keep people alive, to bless people. And this congregation has invested very well back in the 90s with not much money. There was not a lot of money, but it's turned into a very nice investment that carries us. Because if you look at our budget, our weekly offering isn't even close to our weekly budget, what we need to survive. It's because of investments that we're able not only to survive, but to thrive and to support other missions all over the place. And this congregation has always been very generous, and I love that, to be able to bless people, to be good stewards of what God has given us, and to turn that into wealth so that you can bless people is a very biblical principle. But anyway, I'm excited about it. Yep, now you just have to wait. So we're going to dangle that carrot, and now you're going to be like starving by the time we actually do start. Okay, we're in the letter of Titus. And let me talk a little bit about who Titus was. Titus was a companion with Paul, and if you remember in Acts chapter 15, there's the council in Jerusalem where the people came down from Antioch. What do we know about Antioch? What do we know about Antioch? There were two of them. The one in the east. Anybody know anything? There's an expression that Luke used. Yep, they were called Christians first at Antioch. That's where they first dubbed them Christians. We still use that term today, so very significant. I did a class on biblical archaeology before, and I showed the caves in Antioch. The Christians not only were called Christians first in Antioch, but they were meeting, the very first Christians were meeting in a cave. Most of those Christians came from Jerusalem. Why? Yeah, persecution from who? Yeah, led by Saul, later named Paul. So the church goes up to, these Christians, these Christ followers go up to Antioch, and they're literally having worship in a cave because they're hiding. They're in hiding. And then all of a sudden, Saul is on his way up where he's actually going to pass the church in Antioch. He's on his way up to Damascus, and what's he have in his hand? What's he holding in his hand? Some papers. What do those papers say? Yeah, you have permission to find Christians and to persecute them. Paul's on his way to Damascus. He has this vision. He hears Jesus talking. Paul's eyes are blinded. For 3 days he's blinded. And then he's baptized. He's taught, he's baptized. Something like scales fell off of his eyes. And then Paul kind of disappears for a while, but then he goes back to none other than where? Antioch. And that becomes the sending church for all of Paul's missionary journeys. Well, there's a guy there by the name of Titus. We don't know how Titus got to Antioch or how he got connected to Antioch, but he's there. Because Titus is actually from the island of Crete. Does anybody know geography to know where Crete is? Yeah, off the coast of Greece. It's the largest Greek island. And has anybody ever been to Crete? Has anybody ever seen pictures of Crete? You got to see the type of water that's in Crete. Like, you want to talk about the bluest, clearest, most gorgeous water. This island is a paradise. That's where Titus is from. So he's from Greece. He's from the island of Crete. And he's over in Antioch, and he goes down. One of the very first things that the church did in Antioch is they had this council down in Jerusalem, and they were trying to figure out, like, hey, some of these people are talking about circumcision, and you have to be circumcised or you're not saved, and what do we do with that? So this group goes from Antioch. Titus is with them, and they meet with some of Jesus' disciples, some of the apostles. And they have this meeting, and they have this council, and it's decided to go back and to tell them what? There were like 3 things that they decided at this meeting, at the council in Jerusalem. Anybody remember what they were? Yeah, abstain from meat offered to idols, blood, don't eat anything with blood in it, and in a nutshell, don't worry about circumcision. You're saved. You're good and saved without circumcision. All right, so Titus is there. He's at this meeting, and he hears all these things. And why is this significant for Titus? Why would this be significant later? On the island of Crete. Crete is a very Greek culture, very Greek island. And Titus, by the way, is not a Jewish person. He is a Greek. He's a Gentile. So why is it important that Titus was there? If you know anything about the letter that Paul writes to Titus. Because this issue comes up again. Paul writes to Titus and he says, all right, there are some Jewish people coming in, and they're wreaking havoc, and they're dividing the church, and they're telling people you've got to be circumcised to be saved. Well, where did Titus hear that before? Well, he heard it a lot before, but Titus was involved in that decision with the apostles themselves, who said, you don't need to be circumcised. Like literally the people who walked with Jesus, the 12 apostles. Some of them were represented at this meeting, and Titus was there. So he was witness to that. All right, so that's why it's significant. So we're going to jump in and just start reading, starting in chapter 1. Paul, a servant of God and apostle of Jesus Christ. And it's interesting, he appeals to the apostleship to Titus because of that connection. Because Paul doesn't always call himself an apostle when he introduces himself in the letters. And of course, Titus knows exactly who Paul is because he spent a lot of time with him on the mission trails. Paul, a servant of God and an apostle of Jesus Christ, for the sake of the faith of God's elect and their knowledge of the truth, which accords with the godliness in hope of eternal life, which God, who never lies, promised before the ages began, and at the proper time manifested in his word through the preaching with which I have been entrusted by the command of God our Savior. To Titus, my true child in a common faith, grace and peace from God the Father and Christ Jesus our Savior. This is why I left you in Crete, so that you might put what remained into order and appoint elders in every town as I directed you. If anyone, well, before we go on to the qualities of elders, which really similarly, it's very close to 1 Timothy when Paul tells Timothy what the qualities of elders are. So we'll go through this list, but this is why he left Titus on Crete, so that he might put what remained into order and appoint elders in every town. Pretty important things. All right, what's the significance of, I guess we'll cover the latter part because we don't really know what all Paul had him to put into order. I guess we can speculate just for funsies. But why was it important that he's appointing elders in all the towns on the island of Crete? This is a huge island. You got to look on the map. It's very large. Why is this important? Appoint elders in all the towns.
I don't know where exactly you're heading with that, but I mean, it's just kind of talks about the organization of the church and what's important to, like, I think the second part refers to the first part, like set in order.
Set in order?
Yeah. So it's part of what remains.
What were the shepherds tasked with? I guess we'll put it that. Well, let's go back. Let's go back in time. We're in a time machine. We're not going back to the time of Paul and Titus. We're going back, like way back, to the time of Israel. They're out in the wilderness and they're wandering around and they're lost and they're mad and they're frustrated and they're worshiping idols and they're coming and complaining to Moses. What was the purpose of elders throughout the history of Israel? Keep order. Guide. Yeah, to stay within the bounds that were set for them. Like all over antiquity, they would build a gate to the city. It was a city gate. And then they would build a wall around these cities. So there's this great big wall, there's a city gate, so you come in and out of the city through that gate. Otherwise, you wind up a holy person because of the bows and arrows. You don't try to climb the wall. As they say in the South, you don't supposed to do that. You go through the gate. You go through the city gate, in and out. The elders of Israel would sit at the gate. They would just sit at the gate, and the qualities of elders, I don't think, really changed from the Old Testament to the New. I think they're reinforcing the qualities that were already in place for the shepherds who sat at the city gate. And that is, I talked about this when we were in 1 Timothy. These are like the bare minimum requirements. Like a lot of times we look at these qualities and we're like, oh my goodness, like we call them qualifications, which I don't love. I prefer the term qualities because it's not a checklist. It's qualities that a person should have. These are literally the bare minimum. These are not like super over-the-top special people that we're like, wow, do you mean that you're the husband of one wife? Wow, we don't see that very, it wasn't this anomaly. This was literally the bare minimum saying, be a godly person. If you're going to be a shepherd, be a godly person. Don't get drunk. Don't have multiple wives and sleep around. Be a decent person. Don't exasperate your children. All right, so these are the qualities. And there's a reason for that, because the shepherds who would sit at the city gate were respected by the people. They didn't exasperate the people. In fact, in the qualities, somebody who exasperates their children is what? Disqualified. So the shepherds were respected by the people, and the people willingly came to the shepherds. And they would pour their hearts out, and they would seek direction. And the shepherds were, the shepherds or elders, they were older people on purpose. They were wiser people on purpose, and they were highly respected within the community. So keep that in mind, because when we read the qualities, you're going to be like, oh, well, this makes sense. And do you remember, like we talked about this before, what did Moses' father-in-law say to him when he was just exhausted because he's trying to guide the people and put them on the right track, and they keep coming. There's like this mob mentality, and they keep coming to Moses, and his father-in-law says, Moses, what you're doing is not wise. You need to, what? What were his Suggestions. Yeah, you need to delegate. You need to select wise, respected men from among you that can help share this burden. That can help you guide the people. They need a shepherd. And right now, you can't have one person who shepherds 1 million people wandering out in the wilderness. It just doesn't work. So people willingly would go to the shepherds or the elders, and they would pour their hearts out and they would seek direction. I don't think that what Titus says is, or what Timothy says to Titus is a mandate that every church has an elder and you have to have an elder. Obviously, we've not had shepherds for some time. And I think you can find ways to lead without shepherds, especially as a small congregation. But the bigger the congregation and the bigger the needs, you better get shepherds in place. You better have them in place. And I think this is the issue. And especially, especially when you have disruptors. And that's what the island of Crete was. It was full of disruptors, and Paul makes that pretty clear in his letter to Titus. The people needed shepherding. So Paul says, I left you on Crete so that you could appoint elders in every town, and you put what remained into order. So here, verse 6, chapter 1, verse 6. If anyone is above reproach, the husband of one wife. Let me back up to that first statement. If who? Anyone. What do we tend to do when we go through elder selection processes? We don't say anyone. We're like, all right, typically, you drop it down to a vote, and the church, names 3 or 4 people. Paul says, no, if anybody's living their life this way, if anybody among you is above reproach, if anybody among you is the husband of one wife, and if anyone has his children who are believers and are not open to the charge of debauchery or insubordination. What's debauchery? I love that word. I don't think we use that word enough. What's debauchery, you debaucherous person? What's debauchery? We often associate it with drunkenness, but that's not really what it means. What does debauchery mean?
It means the bad person.
The bad person. Debauchery is giving into all of your passions and desires and sensualities that corrupt a person. Drunkenness, orgies, wild, insane living. That's debauchery. You just chase after whatever the next thing is.
Here's what Merriam-Webster says. Extreme indulgence in bodily pleasures, especially sexual pleasure behavior involving sex, drugs, alcohol, etc., considering immoral. So,
it reminds me of that Chris Farley scene. Was that in? I always get the movies mixed up. Wasn't it Black Sheep? Smoking, drinking, snorting. When he's out, trying to campaign for his brother to be governor, and they got it on film. It's a classic movie, anyway. I digress. Yeah, Hollywood. Not just Hollywood. I think society as a whole can tend to chase after whatever the next best thing is. And that does permeate within the church culture as well, because in the church we tend to chase after whatever's going to fill me up, whatever's going to bring me pleasure, as long as I'm happy, right? And so people will chase after the next church and the next biggest thing and the next church, and the bigger and the better programs, and they chase after those things instead of chasing after God. But it's it's kind of under the guise of chasing after God. But if you listen to the language, it's that self-indulgent, I'm going to do what brings me happiness. And ministers do it as well. Like, you all know this is a soapbox of mine. When I hear ministers say, well, this church isn't a good fit. I'm going to go where it's a good fit for me and my family. And I don't even know what that means. And it's very common today to just shop around for both the ministers and the lay members. I know that's not politically correct, but I'm running off like 2 hours of sleep. Okay, so don't be into debauchery, insubordination. You're constantly just fighting people, and you got to be top dog. For an overseer, verse 7, for an overseer as God's steward. Interesting word, right? We were just talking about biblical stewardship. It's not talking about monetary stewardship here. It's talking about what? What's Paul talking about? A shepherd, an overseer, needs to be God's steward. Steward of what?
What belongs to God.
Yeah, which includes everything. It includes, it certainly includes money, but I think more importantly, God's people. You be a good steward of God's people, because if you start losing them, you have to account for that. So do they steward their lives well? And that's kind of the question Paul's asking. Like, are these people who steward their lives well? Do they steward their families well? Do they steward their finances well? Do they steward their alcohol well? Because he talks about that. Still in verse 7, he must not be arrogant or quick-tempered or a drunkard or violent or greedy for gain, but hospitable. We just literally had that sermon about hospitality. Entertaining angels. Be hospitable, because some people have entertained angels. He must be a lover of good, self-controlled, upright, holy, and disciplined. Paul talks a lot about discipline, doesn't he? Paul says, I beat my body, right? He's talking about a spiritual walk, but he's using this metaphor. I train myself. I beat my body. I train myself for this spiritual battle. Are you disciplined? Verse 9, he must hold firm to the trustworthy word as taught, so that he may be able to give instruction in sound doctrine and also rebuke those who contradict it. It goes back to what Charles said. It's to help guide and direct people back to God, and that includes both encouragement and sometimes rebuke. Is this person able to do it? Are they wise enough? Are they mature enough? Are they disciplined enough? Are they able to do that without being a hothead and flying off the rails? Because that'll drive people away. Can they do it in a mature way and shepherd people back to the flock? I'm going to stop here because we're out of time and we're right at a paragraph break. What'd you say?
Imagine that.
I know. Imagine.
Weren't you supposed to get all Titus done today?
I was, but then you blew that to smithereens. No way. No, that was for last week. All right. Thank you guys for your comments, and we will continue, I guess, now to the end of June. As long as it takes. I may have to find something else to do in the meantime, just for a couple weeks, but maybe we'll do a little bit more of a carrot.
When I get back, I can start something until we get
Okay. Okay. We'll work it out. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all, and we'll see you in a few.
Out that they will be gone.